talk to you today about is what I think is a huge opportunity for the finance function, for CFOs, to really leverage digital transformation and have a massive impact on their organizations, particularly post-COVID. So I'll start with a little bit of my background. So my background has been all pretty much in business transformation and change, not intentionally, but in the different roles I've had in senior financial leadership roles and strategy roles at HP, at Madge, at Cisco, and even into my role at Amazon Web Services. I've always seemed to have gravitated to being at the center of a lot of change. And so I'm very passionate about change. My roles at Cisco included EMEA Corporate Controller, the Emerging Markets CFO, and also the Head of Sales Strategy and Operations for the EMEA Sales Organization. And I was at Cisco for about 20 years. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, I got the opportunity when I was talking to Amazon to join a small team they were setting up in Amazon Web Services. And the purpose of the team was that Amazon Web Services, as you may know, is a cloud provider. And they were very successful with the digital natives. About 85% of the digital natives used Amazon Web Services to develop their businesses and then scale them globally. And I would include people like Airbnb, Uber, Netflix, etc. They've got a lot of revenue from that. But when they started to try and help the large enterprises, they found they were working very much with the IT organization. And it was very much about how do we modernize our IT, how do we move out of data centers into the cloud. And so that didn't really resonate with the executives in those large organizations. They saw Amazon Web Services as something that was really for the IT organization to focus on. And what our team did was, build the proposition that we were really saying, this technology can really enable your business strategy. And that's really the flavor of my talk today, is that I'll take you sort of through these different sections today in the next 30 minutes. What I'd like to talk about is the business challenges we're all facing. Talk a little bit about digital transformation from the perspective of what can we learn from the digital natives, but also what do I see as the challenges when working with large enterprises at Cisco and at Amazon that they faced when they were trying to drive digital transformation. Then go on to talk a little bit about how can you lead that, how can you build a modern digital enterprise, and then how can finance in particular play a big role in that? How can finance become a sort of a digital champion and sponsor change? Because I think the finance organization is incredibly well placed. The CFO has a very broad remit. We've talked about that today, and they have an increasingly strategic role. And they have a great opportunity to sponsor digital transformation. There isn't really a more data-driven organization inside it or function inside of the business, if you think about it, than finance. And one of the keys to digital transformation is becoming a data-driven enterprise. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'll sort of try and bring that home with you, if you like, today. So some of the business challenges, and this is one of my favorite quotes. The world will never be this slow again. It's been attributed to many people. If you think about it, the pace of change is really accelerating. And I think change is great. My old CEO at Cisco used to say, change is great as long as I'm the one driving it. And at the moment, we certainly don't feel as though we're the ones driving it, do we? We're responding to it. Obviously, digital disruptors are often disrupting markets. If you look at the sort of scale of the change, this is the S&P 500. I've done the same analysis with the FTSE 100. Since the beginning of the century, 40%, have I lost my sound? No. 40% of the companies that were in the S&P 500 have been replaced. Startlingly, McKinsey say that by 2027, and this was a forecast they did in 2020, but by 2027, 75% of the ones that were on the indices in 2020 will also disappear. So I think what we've seen, and many of you have heard the other presenters talk about it, is really unprecedented change. And I used unprecedented because it seems to be everybody's favorite word at the moment. But massive change. It's a sort of a perfect storm. Customer expectations have been increasing all the time as people experience better experience in certain aspects of their life. They expect the same frictionless experience in all aspects of their life. And I think we used to joke that, you went to work to get access to the best technology because at home it was all a bit clunky. Well, we've had certain things happen, haven't we, where we've probably got better technology. We can adopt technology faster personally in our lives and enable more of our lives digitally than we can in our businesses, because it tends to be quite difficult to change. And that's one of the things I'll talk about. I'd also say that on top of the focused digital disruptors that are sort of using new customer experiences, new digital models to challenge the established enterprises, we've also got stakeholders changing all the time in terms of what their demands are. Things that are moving up the stack in terms of what they care about are now things like sustainability and diversity and inclusion. And the sort of profit weighting has gone down and will probably continue to go down in the way that executives who run businesses are rewarded. And I think on top of all that change, if you think that's not enough, and it feels like we've been through a huge amount of change in the last 20 years, massively accelerated by the last 18 months, in some ways I think it's only just the beginning. Because we haven't yet seen companies exploit all the new technologies that are coming, like AI, ML, IoT, blockchain, autonomous things. And McKinsey's recent survey talks about how it's been a bit of a digital tipping point and that COVID has really transformed business forever. And so my view is only the most agile will survive. We've sort of seen that in these indices. I think if you looked at the stock prices or the stock indices over the last couple of years, everything was trending up nicely, massive adjustment with COVID, then a bit of a recovery. If you look at the individual stocks, it's the modern, agile, digital businesses that have really done the best. They've rebounded stronger than ever because they're able to respond, they're agile and so on. And I'll just use a quote from my old boss, Mr. Bezos, because he believes that it's all about agility. It's not about having the best product in the marketplace. What Amazon tries to do is get something out there quickly and then iterate it with customer feedback. And that's a theme of reinventing with customers and being customer-centric that you will see throughout my presentation. So agility is the only sustainable advantage because everything else people can copy. And customers used to say to me, like logistics companies would say to me at Amazon, where will Amazon be with its logistics next year? I said, well, the important thing is you've got access to the same technology. If you adopt the same ways of working, you can be just as agile. It's not about trying to be a fast follower. If you want to be a leader, you have to reinvent with your customers and be customer-centric. Some more IMD data, actually, that Maria was also using. IMD in its most recent Digital Vortex report talks about how they can now see that same positive correlation I was talking about in the stock prices of who's done well through the COVID era. They can see a correlation between a business's ability to perform during the pandemic and its digital maturity. And so they're sort of starting to see people value companies more on their digital maturity. And if that wasn't enough, I think, as Maria pointed out, it's really moved up in terms of what's on the top of mind of executives. They've moved up from pre-crisis, 68% said it was very high priority. It's now over 90%, I would say. The interesting thing is that they also say that companies realize they need to transform. They're just not sure how to do it because it's very difficult, and we'll talk about that. So let's talk a little bit now about digital transformation. I want to sort of give you my definition. So my definition is that digital transformation is the combination of culture and people and ways of working with technology. A lot of people focus on the technology aspect. McKinsey said that in 2019, companies around the globe invested about $1.3 trillion in transformations, and about 0.9 of that, about 0.9 trillion out of 1.3 trillion, didn't really deliver any value. And they attribute that to people only focusing on the technology. Will implement a new system or a new technology, but they don't think about the rest of it, which is the important piece of culture and people and ways of working. So if we look at, what are the challenges to digital transformation before we start talking about, what is it some of the modern digital agile enterprises do? If you think about it, it's a real challenge if you're part of an established organization, a 20th century organization. Typically as you grow, you scale with stability, and to drive stability and predictability, which drives a real focus into the functional structure, doesn't it? The real focus in these functional structures is operational excellence, its efficiency, its cost, and it's about perfecting each function. So as you scale, the functions tend to become much more command and control, and it's about driving that perfection down the organization. That also means, in my experience, that as organizations scale, they lose their focus on innovation and agility. They lose that focus on swarming around customers because people become more regimented by the fact they're part of a functional structure, functional silos. And as a result, those enterprises tend to lose out. They tend to lack a capacity and a competency to change the business. Everybody's focused on run the business. I've been working with a healthcare provider, and you talk to all the top 20 leaders, they're all 24/7, working really hard. When you talk to them about change the business, it's just like, well, I haven't got time to do that. And yet they recognize they've got a lot of people doing a lot of manual work, they recognize they're not very efficient. But it's like, traditional organization structures tend to create a flywheel, don't they? A gyroscopic effect, where you're just in lots and lots of management processes driving operational efficiency. The strategy's cascaded down, the metrics are cascaded down, the rewards are reflected that way in the functions. It makes it very hard to change. And if you don't have people focused on change the business, and I think Marcus talked about how they've invested in change the business resources, then it's going to mean that you don't actually change. So what can we learn from some of the sort of modern digital enterprises that have sort of emerged, often cloud-based companies that run in the cloud? We're seeing new business models, we're seeing new work cultures, very big focus on customer centricity, a big focus on innovation and reinvention everywhere. Obviously, they're trying to avoid becoming unfunctionalized and more rigid. They're organized for constant change. What you'll typically see, and I can certainly attest to this in Amazon, is small cross-functional teams behaving almost like startups. So, people close to the problem working in cross-functional teams, empowered small cross-functional teams. Just some examples of companies I see as creating value from data, digital enterprises creating value. I think everybody has experienced Amazon and the Amazon.com way of doing business. Amazon is relentless in its pursuit of data and automates everything. I think that those are some of the attributes I would say there. But think about Zara, more of a classic business model, you would think. But Zara, the homeware and clothing company, don't create a range for the season. They send out their first ranges, and they're stocked in the stores, and they ruthlessly monitor customers' reactions in the stores to those products and feed that back to the design process. So 2 to 3 weeks later, there may be a slight iteration reaching the racks in some of their stores. If you contrast that to some of the classic clothes retailers, they tend to design a clothing range for a season, mass produce it, and then stock it, and then figure out how to sell it all. So it's a very different, they're not reinventing with their customers, they're making a big bet and then hoping it all sells through. Think about companies like Uber and Airbnb. I would say what they do is connect customers with experiences digitally. Because if you think about it, all Uber does is connect their riders with empty cars. If you think about Airbnb, they're just connecting travelers with empty rooms. So a very digital experience, and it's really disrupted the two business or the two markets that they're in. So some of the attributes I would say of a modern digital enterprise is it's got to be data-driven. I think that data has to be everywhere. It has to inform your strategy. It has to help you drive operational excellence. Those insights then help you make decisions quickly, informed decisions. So, but then you have to be able to react. You have to be able to change the business quickly. So fast execution is another key piece of that. I'd also call out that it's important that you have the ability to try lots of things. A lot of these businesses have a culture of trying things and then iterating. Amazon talks about failing fast. It was certainly a big cultural thing at Cisco. Fail fast and then iterate. Try things and iterate. If you think about it, if all your experiments work, they weren't really experiments. And I have to say, a lot of the businesses I've worked in, failure was not okay. It was career limiting. But Bezos talks about it being the bed partner, if you like, of innovation. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. And it's those breakthroughs that you get through your failures that help you succeed in the long term. He talks about investing billions of dollars in it. Don't bet the farm. The important thing is low-cost experiments and the ability to try something differently. And ultimately, you've got to automate everything. The other thing to think about is your operating model going to allow you to change? Is that gyroscope, that flywheel, going to allow you to change quickly? Is everybody totally consumed in your finance organization or your overall company in run the business? I've been working with customers this year that have phenomenal discipline of operational excellence. People spend all day, every day, driving operational excellence. The problem with that is that when they need to change, they don't have management processes to do that. It's not part of people's jobs. So because their behavior is intentionally driven down the organization when they cascade the strategy and the metrics, it works really well when customer expectations don't change so much. It works really well when there's not a lot of economic volatility. It doesn't work so well when things are as they have been for the last 18 months. So think about how, as an organization, you can evolve. I'm not advocating blowing up your org structures. Some people are looking at that, or we might reorganize into a process organization where we don't have functions, but we are organized by process. I have yet to see how that will work. I think it's an interesting experiment. But I think you do need to think about how can you become much more customer-centric. As finance teams, we have internal customers. Are we really working backwards from what they need from the finance organization? What really differentiates the finance organization? Can we help the organization become more data-driven and work in those more cross-functional ways? The other piece, and it's related again to what Marcus was talking about, is that I think it's incredibly important that the business teams and the technology teams partner well. And one of the best ways to do that is to embed the technology teams in the business functions. Rather than having a centralized IT and you have the business requirements flying across and then the specs coming back, etc. Where you have the technology teams embedded in the business, first of all, the business is paying for it, feels comfortable that it's guiding where that investment goes. But then the combination of the business and technology teams working together can fast prototype and iterate and solve problems quickly, whether it be an internal customer problem or an external customer problem. And that in itself will drive a lot of innovation and agility. And it's not about trying to do this everywhere straight away. It's about trying some of these fast iterative sprints in just a couple of places so that you experience how it works, in my experience. Because once you've seen how it can work, you'll probably want to scale it out more broadly. And I do know that, Amazon works this way, but I've also, talking to Amazon's customers like Rolls-Royce, they're embedding technology teams in the business functions. Using Amazon again, apologies, but they have a technology team in finance who have sort of disintermediated deliberately finance from the business of reporting. They've built the tools to give everybody access to data and create the predictive analytics so that finance can move out of the reporting business and into the insight business and the influencing business. So that's something to think about. So if we take some of those lessons and think about how do we start a journey to build a more modern digital enterprise, this is based on a lot of the conversations I have had with CFOs, but also with CEOs and COOs, and it seems to resonate with them as well. I think the important thing is when you think about transformation as technology, you've also got to think about the culture and the people. But if we start with the technology, it's important that you prioritize where you invest, as in any business decision, by aligning it to your business strategy. Don't think about how do I modernize my IT, move it to the cloud, et cetera, or solve a problem with a particular application. Think about how does this align with our business strategy? Work backwards from it. It's really important that an organization is very focused on its differentiation, and I think finance has a big role to play here in helping steer the conversations to focus on this. I've certainly been in lots of meetings in lots of companies where the functional leader wants their version of something. Let's customize Salesforce. Let's do this. Let's do that. And if you step back from it and you say, is that really going to make any difference to our ultimate customers? So I think finance can bring that perspective and that challenge, because it's important that you do that so that you can prioritize where you invest. What are your transformation journeys? It's important that you only build what differentiates you. Everything else, you should just be buying off the shelf as much as you can, or even partnering for it. So I saw a funny statement the other day. Somebody said it's about moving from ego systems to ecosystems. So how do you build those partnerships? People who work with you, who can help you transform your business, leaving you to focus on the things that really differentiate you. And the final advice I give is always think about investing and change the business resources, because if you don't have them, it just won't happen. So if you think technology change is hard, I think culture change is even harder. And as McKinsey pointed out, that is a major challenge. And I was often called in to talk to Amazon customers who'd done the technology migration, who'd done the modernization, but they weren't getting the benefits of it because they were very focused on the technology, but people weren't responding to it and working in new ways. So they weren't getting the value from all that investment. And this is where I talk about you've got to think about how you champion these new ways of working. You've got to think about how you enable small cross-functional teams with access to technology to do some of these. And it's best to start, somebody mentioned it earlier, you've got to get the lighthouse projects, you've got to get the quick wins so that people can see how these new ways of working can deliver value quickly. And just to reinforce it, what I said earlier, it's really important that you encourage people to experiment and not be afraid of failing. So, how does finance become a transformation champion? I think that the CFO role is shifting. We've been talking about it all day. The finance role is shifting. CFOs are being asked much more and more, this is some Accenture survey data, to get involved in identifying new business models. The CFO is a trusted independent party, if you like. They're trusted. The CEO typically wants them to get involved in identifying new business models, to think about how they can drive business change. And certainly with the last 18 months, how do we increase our resilience? Which is also another way of saying, how do we become more agile? And obviously the final piece is exploring new technologies. And I think if you think about the challenge, you can either attack this in one of two ways. You can either think about being a digital sponsor and champion across your company and look for those opportunities, and we'll talk about some of those in a second. or you can lead by example. You can start building transformation as a competency within the finance organization. And the simple advice I would give here is, focus on the high value add. Think about who is the customer of finance. Think about what really differentiates the finance work, and then think about how do you get out of doing the things that aren't really a differentiator for finance and that are seen as low value add. I think organizations can get quite frustrated with finance organizations that got lots of people trapped in low value added work. And to be honest, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of how do you attract talent, if you're an organization that is much more focused on the high value add and much less focused on the low value add or the more less differentiating work, then you're going to be somewhere that people want to work and want to stay. So in some ways it's about thinking about how do you move across this chart from left to right? How can you streamline operations? How can you automate the repetitive tasks and streamline processes? How can you use automated monitoring? How can you move more into the agile business support with continuous closing and replanning so that the business leaders don't feel sort of hostage, if you like, to some of the reporting calendars and planning calendars? How can you become much more agile there? How can you help the organization itself become much more data-driven? Finance is perceived to be sort of the watermark with that sort of trusted single source of truth for financial data. But increasingly, organizations need to become much more data-driven altogether. So they need operational data, they need customer data. I think finance could really step up there and play that role of data steward, of get itself out of the business of doing all the reporting. I know some people find that very satisfying to generate all the reports on a weekly, daily, quarterly processes. But ultimately, technology can do that. But what they can't do is influence the business leaders and share insight and sort of really work with them on that. And the other thing to think about is that by democratizing your data, you're really giving everybody access to that. You're reducing the latency. People don't have to ask for information. They can just get it. So the organization's latency is significantly reduced. So that's one way of thinking about how does finance lead by example and build that competency and then think about using that as the foundation to go off and work across the other functions. I think the other thing to think about is, how do you look at your overall organization, whether it be sales or marketing? How could that? How could we add value there? And one of the, this is a sort of a simple example. The pie chart is, if you like, is at the time I was the head of sales strategy and operations. We were looking at how digital transformation could help the sales organization. So we looked at where they were spending their time. Obviously, that's not reflected in the financial reporting, where people spend their time. But by analyzing where they were spending their time, we found that we had about 1,000 account managers carrying about a $10 billion quota. They were spending a day a week cleaning data. So a whole day a week, 20% of their time. They were only spending 23% of their time with customers. The rest was meetings and travel and training and stuff like that. So the opportunity was, if we could get rid of that 20% of data cleaning so that they could get paid and they could get insights about their customers, we could mean they could spend 43% of their time with customers. And in theory, nearly double the business. Obviously, the sales leader didn't want to sign up for that, but that is the opportunity. And I've had very similar conversations with marketing teams, with a wealth management company when I was working at Amazon. They said, we can't get enough wealth advisors. That, they're in short supply, but we know they're working on lots of low value add. Where can technology help us to automate the low value add so they can spend much more time with clients? And again, a similar situation with a healthcare company. They have 2,000 medical practitioners scanning people, millions of people a year. But they're spending a huge amount of time manually getting the data ready to scan the person. Then they're trying to look at all the images themselves. Then they're trying to write up the report and send that diagnosis to the GP. Huge opportunity to help them with giving them the data automatically, but to be able to scan the patient. Huge opportunity to use AI to look at the images, to look at the patterns, often more reliably actually than a human. So augment them with AI. And then think about how could they automate the report writing. That there are lots of tools now, such as speech to text, that can really automate that. So think about your organization, and you've got an organization, it's got a P&L, it's got all the sort of run rate expenses in its categories, but sometimes you need to take a different lens and look at the sort of high value versus the low value added work. And then that's the opportunity to go after with digital transformation. So just as a recap, really, I think the finance organization has got a huge opportunity to help the businesses that you support by helping them understand the opportunity for transformation. But lots of people already think they're doing transformation. Many companies have sort of what they call transformation theatre. Everybody's got their pet transformation project. The important thing is to help them prioritize it and make sure that you're aligning it to your strategy and you're aligning it to the customer. If something doesn't really make a difference to your customers, somebody once said to me, "Oh, we'd like to break up our accounting systems into microservices, the way Amazon has reinvented its IT systems." I said, well, no matter how good your accounting system is, it's not really going to change your customer's decision to buy from you. The things to focus on are things that drive a better customer experience. And that was quite a tough conversation, because it was, a major company at board level, a CEO and a CFO. They were convinced they needed to reinvent the accounting system into microservices. So think about, how do you build transformation as a competency starting in finance, but that will then give you the ability to go out and influence the other functions. Think about helping the business leaders. They want to invest in transformation, but all their resources are tied up in run the business. How can you help them redirect some of their spending? They've got the opportunity to choose how they spend their money, help them understand how they could invest in transformation and drive better outcomes. Help the technology team. Often the technology team doesn't have access to the board, the finance organization does. Partner with them, but partner in a way that helps drive sensible investments in transformation, and finally just sponsor those small sprints. So I think as a next step, if you're thinking about this, is how do you build that competency in your team? First of all, I think it's a big ask to get people to focus on something that they may not be comfortable with. So how do you help your finance leadership team take on this challenge? How do you help educate them and align them? And then the other thing is think about just doing one small sprint. Partner with the IT organization or partner with an external partner to drive one small sprint that will iterate and solve a problem quickly, so that you can see how these new ways of working that are very familiar to startup companies and are increasingly common in large enterprises, how they could work in your organization. And then you can think, if you like that, you can then think about how you scale that. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. So thank you very much. I'd love to get your feedback, so please do connect with me on LinkedIn and give me your feedback. But I think we've got a few minutes just for a couple of questions. So. Stunned silence. Aha.
Thank you, John. That was really interesting. One of the things you held up were, I think it was Uber and Airbnb and their digital models. But
yes,
as far as I know, they've never turned a profit. And potentially I think Airbnb doesn't think it ever can. So should we be holding them up and aspiring to that model? Or is it actually all going to, are the cards going to kind of come crumbling down?
They might. I don't know. Amazon didn't turn a profit for a long time. I think the philosophy for those organizations is scaling and getting to such a scale that they can offer a superior service or experience, and then they'll start to monetize it. So it's a very long-term bet. Other people ask that same question. It's a good question. There's no guaranteed answer. lots of the digital startups don't make money, but then they get bought for huge amounts of money because of the operating model that they have. I guess for Airbnb and Uber, they're creating a platform-based business with that technology, which I think they will then add more and more services to. And they'll be very good at it, and they'll have the scale, and they'll have the ways of working to do that. Ultimately, whether they can make money or not, I don't know.
If the value is created for the economy, they need to exist, and they are people's like customers are helping for this company to exist.
Yeah. No, I agree. Did you manage to hear that?
I didn't catch it, but
yeah. Can we get a microphone to the? Okay. Come on, Lewis, sprint. This is a fast iterative sprint, by the way. There we go.
I wouldn't like speak stronger. Now, what I said basically is, a lot of companies, their mission is not to make profit. Think about a no-profit organization, for instance, in Uber or Airbnb or whatever. I think if they create value, it's they kind of like legitimize their way of being in a market and operating in a market. And then we shouldn't be surprised that if every 6 months and a year they ask for more money from the investors, because that's their business model, I would say. And I think they will never make money, I would say, or at least because are creating value as service businesses. To be honest, there will be area where they can make money, and other area where they don't make money, and overall potentially worldwide they don't make money at all. So, for instance, I was reading about Uber. Pretty much makes money only in central London potentially because of before COVID. Now I don't know, I'm not sure, but this is the dilemma of a lot of companies. It is what it is. When you are providing services, or for instance, like a train line, there are routes that are very profitable, routes that are less profitable, but you need to serve for something, and you are legitimized to operate because of that.
Yeah. I think it's an investment bet, and who knows whether it will play out. But the fact is that there are more and more of these digital disruptors going into more and more markets, and people are backing them. And I guess their theory is that if you back enough of them, and they pay off big, then you've got a good return. So, I think it's particularly difficult if you're in a market where one of these well-funded disruptors come in, because they don't operate the same way. A friend of mine was the CEO of a large hotel group, and he's like, oh, this is just not fair, they don't follow the same rules. But they were very disrupted by it, and as a result they had to respond. And I'm certainly not advocating that everybody goes, right, let's just chuck that company structure away and reinvent ourselves as a digital native. All I'm saying is I think there are ways of working with technology that we can adopt in more established businesses. And then the other philosophy of partnering a lot and just focusing on what really differentiates you is a good one. One of my favorite examples is, I think it was T-Mobile and Virgin Mobile. I'll probably get corrected on this. And they both focused, T-Mobile focused on the network, and Virgin Mobile focused on the customer service. And Virgin Mobile was more successful, but they actually only used T-Mobile's network. They said, well, for us the business is about monetizing a network, it doesn't have to be ours, we'll get somebody else to run that. And if you think of it, are there elements of your business that you could partner with or even outsource? I often used to get into conversations with Amazon customers and say, are you sure you want to do all the distribution yourself? Why not use Deliver by Amazon? Because that enables you to focus on what you're really good at. But a lot of people are very threatened. They think, I don't want to work with Amazon, it's the devil. And so they were very wary of it. But ultimately what Amazon was offering was all the technology that it was using itself and scale. So it's a difficult one. Yeah, I think things are being shaken up and will continue to be shaken up.
So
Yeah.
So the capital appreciation point is there. If it's a digital disruptor, if someone's going to buy it, it's a good model.
Yeah. Any other? Oh, yeah. Great.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about transformation, and I think as finance leaders, I think we think about creating scalable platforms to support our businesses grow, but that to me feels like there's a potential conflict, and certainly a conflict that I'm seeing on our own digital transformation is we get told all the time, well, our clients want it that way. So to use, I guess, a sort of repeat process, invoicing, our client doesn't want their invoice that way. They want it this way, which obviously then hampers the ability to create scalable operations. How would you advise people in our roles to balance that type of conflict?
Yeah, I guess my first thought is I think it is important to work backward from customers. But ultimately, I think the question is, does the customer want something that is, what is the best experience they want, and how important is that format to them, and make that trade-off. Because, in some ways, Amazon says it's going to be the most customer-centric business in the world, just to use them again, sorry. But in some ways, they seem very inflexible because they want to get the scaling. So I think you've got to decide which way you want to go. You get that with internal customers. They demand that you do something that, I think at Cisco we had 43 different versions of Salesforce because everybody thought wasn't quite right for their sales organization. Let's customize it. And it just caused all sorts of issues and cost a fortune. Didn't make a damn bit of difference to the customers. So, I think if you can apply that sort of discipline of, will it really make a difference to the customer? And where does it stand in their priorities, or where does it stand in your strategic priorities? That's the best way to do it. But it's not binary. Yeah. Last one, yes, sorry, I'm late.
Just a minor one, this one. You talked about, I'm going to try and spell this word right, democratizing data within your organization, but comes with that is transparency. Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of directors and business leaders, they are worried about that transparency and the fact that middle management maybe get to see some of that transparency and hence can see performance of the company. How do we help them in terms of mindset?
Yes, I think when I talk about democratizing data, I really mean giving people access to the data they need to do their job. And I think you can make some judgment calls about whether they really need to see how much the CEO is claiming on his expenses and stuff like that, right? So, think about, the medical clinicians that go off and do all sorts of mining to get the data from different sources and 13 different systems I think they were looking at to get all the data for a patient before they could scan them. A huge burden. If they could have that presented to them using RPA or AML or something, then it would make a big difference to their lives. So I think democratizing data to me is people just being able to get the data they need to do their jobs, rather than necessarily just making it available and open to everybody. And just, Amazon did that. Other companies are increasingly doing that. And I think Marcus was sharing his dashboards, where that's a way of democratizing data. Everybody can see how we're doing, but you don't always have to give everybody visibility at every level, because sometimes you have to make sure people don't get access to material data that would have that would make them be an insider. But give everybody access to that. So you've got to do some, analysis on who really needs what and make some calls on that. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm not allowed any more questions, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble with Lewis for failing to control my own session. So thank you very much indeed.